At the restaurant, my sister clinked her glass and said, "Everyone, let's toast to family. Except for Noah, he's just the adopted one." They all laughed. Then the waiter handed me a $2,980 bill for their whole meal. I slid it back and said, "Try my sister's card. She booked the table under her name." She went pale when the manager walked over. I, 32M, had been estranged from my family for almost 3 years when my sister reached out. She said everyone wanted to reconnect, that enough time had passed, and maybe we could all move forward. I was skeptical, but part of me wanted to believe people could change. She suggested dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, somewhere nice where we could talk things through like adults. I agreed, though something in my gut told me this was a mistake. The restaurant was the kind of place where you needed a reservation weeks in advance. High ceilings, dim lighting, servers in pressed white shirts gliding between tables. I arrived exactly on time and found them already seated at a large round table near the back. My parents, my sister, her husband, my brother, and a few cousins I hadn't seen in years. They waved me over with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. I sat down and immediately noticed the champagne bottles already on the table, half empty. They'd started without me. My mother asked how I'd been, and I gave her the basics. Work was good. I'd gotten a promotion. My apartment was comfortable. She nodded along like she was listening, but her eyes kept drifting to the menu. My father barely acknowledged me, focusing instead on his phone. My sister was the only one who seemed engaged, asking about my job, my hobbies, whether I was seeing anyone. Her questions felt rehearsed, like she'd prepared them beforehand. The server came by, and they ordered without hesitation. Appetizers, entrees, expensive wines, desserts. Everything. I ordered a simple pasta dish and water. My sister insisted I try the wine, said it was a special occasion, but I declined. Something about the whole setup felt off. They were too cheerful, too performative, like actors in a play I hadn't been given the script for. Dinner progressed with surface-level conversation. They talked about their lives, their kids, their vacations. Nobody asked me anything substantial. My brother mentioned buying a new car. My sister talked about renovating her kitchen. It was all so mundane, so deliberately safe. I realized they weren't here to reconnect. They were here to perform reconciliation, to check a box, to tell themselves they'd tried. Then dessert arrived. Elaborate chocolate constructions, fruit tarts, creme brulee. My sister ordered a round of after-dinner drinks for everyone. I watched the bill in my mind climbing higher and higher. The server kept bringing more bottles, more plates, and nobody seemed concerned about the cost. My sister caught my eye and smiled, and that's when I knew something was coming. She stood up, glass in hand, and tapped it with her knife. The table went quiet. She cleared her throat dramatically and began a toast about family, about how important it was to stick together, about blood being thicker than water. Everyone nodded along, raising their glasses. Then she paused, looked directly at me, and added that everyone here was real family except for me because I was just the adopted one. The table erupted in laughter. Not polite chuckles, but full-throated laughter like she'd delivered the punchline to a joke they'd all been waiting for. I sat there frozen. My mother was laughing. My father was smiling into his wine. My brother was slapping the table. The cousins were exchanging glances and snickering. This was the real reason for dinner. This was the reconciliation they'd planned. A public humiliation disguised as a family gathering. I didn't react. I learned a long time ago that showing emotion only gave them ammunition. Instead, I pulled out my phone and pretended to check something. The laughter died down eventually, and they went back to their desserts, satisfied with themselves. My sister sat down looking pleased, like she'd accomplished something meaningful. The server approached our table about 10 minutes later with the check. He walked directly to me and placed the black leather folder in front of me. I opened it and saw the total, $2,980. Every appetizer, every entree, every bottle of wine, every dessert, every cocktail. All of it on one bill, and they'd assumed I would pay. I looked around the table. Nobody made eye contact. They were suddenly very interested in their phones, their napkins, the art on the walls. This had been the plan all along. Invite me to dinner, humiliate me, stick me with the bill. A perfect little revenge scheme for whatever imagined slight they'd been nursing for 3 years. I closed the folder and slid it across the table to my sister. I told her she should try her card since she'd booked the table under her name. The color drained from her face. She stammered something about how she thought we were splitting it, how she didn't bring enough on her card for the whole thing, how this was supposed to be my treat. I reminded her that she'd invited me, chosen the restaurant, ordered for everyone, and never once mentioned I'd be paying. I said if she'd booked under her name, the restaurant would have her card on file anyway. She looked to my parents for support. My mother suggested we all split it equally, which would have been over $300 per person. I pointed out that I'd ordered a $28 pasta and water. I wasn't paying $300 for food I didn't eat and wine I didn't drink. My father started saying something about family helping family, and I cut him off. I reminded him of his toast about blood being thicker than water, about real family, and asked if adopted children counted when the bill arrived. The server returned, sensing tension. My sister tried explaining that there'd been a misunderstanding, that they needed separate checks, but he explained that for parties over 6 people, they couldn't split the bill after the meal was finished. It was restaurant policy. Everything had been ordered under one tab. She asked if they could put it on multiple cards, and he said yes, but someone needed to handle the payment now. My sister looked at her husband. He suddenly remembered he'd left his wallet in the car. My brother said he'd already maxed out his card this month. The cousins quietly excused themselves to the bathroom and never came back. My parents sat there in silence, unwilling to pay but also unwilling to admit they'd orchestrated this whole thing. The manager walked over. He'd been watching from across the room and sensed a problem. My sister tried explaining again, her voice getting higher and more frantic. She said there'd been a mistake, that they thought someone else was paying, that they needed time to figure it out. The manager asked very calmly who had made the reservation. My sister admitted she had. He asked if she'd provided a credit card when booking. She said yes. He explained that if the bill wasn't settled in the next few minutes, he'd charge the card on file. She looked at me desperately, asking if I was really going to let this happen, if I was really going to humiliate her like this. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said she'd spent the last 2 hours humiliating me in front of everyone, that she'd orchestrated an entire evening designed to make me feel small, and now she was upset because her plan had backfired. I told her I hoped she enjoyed her meal because it was going to be an expensive lesson. The manager excused himself and returned a minute later. He informed my sister that her card had been charged the full amount. She went completely pale. Her husband started asking how they were going to pay rent. My brother muttered something about her being stupid. My mother looked at me like I'd just committed a crime. My father stood up and said we were leaving. I stood up too. I looked at each of them and said this was the last time they'd see me. No more chances, no more dinners, no more attempts at reconciliation. They'd made it clear what they thought of me, and I'd made it clear I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. I told them to enjoy their lives without the adopted kid around to mock and exploit. I walked out of that restaurant and felt lighter than I had in years. My phone started buzzing before I even reached my car. Texts from my sister calling me every name imaginable. Messages from my mother saying I'd ruined everything. My brother sent a long rant about family loyalty. I blocked all of them. Update 1. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls. I'd blocked my immediate family, but apparently they'd rallied the extended family and family friends to contact me. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in a decade were leaving voicemails about how disappointed they were. Aunts and uncles were sending emails about respecting my elders. Family friends were messaging me on social media about forgiveness and moving forward. I ignored all of it. What they didn't know was that I'd recorded the entire dinner on my phone. Not video, just audio, but it captured everything. My sister's toast, the laughter, the attempted bill manipulation, all of it. I had no intention of using it unless they pushed me. They pushed me. My sister posted on social media about what a terrible person I was, how I'd abandoned my family, and left her with a massive bill she couldn't afford. She painted herself as the victim, said she'd tried to reconcile with her troubled brother and he'd embarrassed her publicly. The post got dozens of sympathetic comments from people who didn't know the full story. I responded by posting the audio clip. I didn't add commentary. I didn't explain. I just posted it with the caption, "Here's what actually happened." The response was immediate and brutal. People who'd been sympathizing with my sister suddenly went silent. Others started commenting about how cruel the toast was, how calculated the whole setup seemed. A few family friends reached out privately to apologize, saying they hadn't known the context. My sister deleted her post within an hour, but screenshots had already spread. People in our hometown were talking about it. Her friends were questioning her version of events. Her husband's family apparently heard the audio and were horrified. The narrative she'd tried to build collapsed completely. My mother called from a number I hadn't blocked. She was furious. She demanded I take down the audio, said I was tearing the family apart, that this was private business that didn't need to be public. I asked her if she remembered laughing at my sister's toast. She said it was just a joke, that I was too sensitive, that siblings tease each other. I told her that wasn't teasing, that was cruelty, and I was done pretending otherwise. She started crying, said I was breaking her heart, and I hung up. My father sent an email. It was long and rambling, full of justifications and excuses. He said they'd only included me in the dinner because they felt obligated. He said I'd always been difficult, always been ungrateful for what they'd provided. He said the adoption was the biggest mistake they'd made because I'd never truly been part of the family. I read it once and felt nothing. These were people I'd spent years trying to please, trying to belong with. And this was what they really thought. I deleted the email and blocked his address. Update 2. About 2 weeks after the dinner, my sister's husband reached out. He used a mutual acquaintance's phone because I'd blocked him too. He asked if we could talk, said he wanted to explain his side. I was curious enough to agree to meet for coffee, public place, daytime. He looked exhausted when he arrived. He apologized immediately, said he'd had no idea what my sister was planning. He'd thought it was a genuine reconciliation dinner. When she'd clinked her glass for the toast, he'd been expecting something sentimental, and then she'd made that comment about me being adopted. He said he'd laughed out of shock, not agreement, but admitted it didn't matter because the damage was done. He explained that my sister had been planning this for months. She'd been furious that I'd cut contact with the family, took it as a personal rejection, and wanted to punish me. She'd convinced everyone to go along with it by saying it would be funny, that I deserved to be taken down a peg, that I'd always acted superior to them. The expensive restaurant was intentional. The massive order was intentional. Sticking me with the bill was the finale. He said the credit card charge had caused serious problems at home. They'd been saving for a down payment on a house, and nearly $3,000 on one dinner had decimated their savings. My sister had tried disputing the charge, claiming she hadn't authorized it, but the restaurant provided evidence of her reservation, her card on file, and her signature on the merchant agreement. The dispute was denied. He asked if there was any way I'd consider helping with the cost. I stared at him. He quickly added that he knew it was asking a lot, that they'd treated me terribly, but they were really struggling now. Their rent was due, they had car payments, and the holidays were coming. I asked him why he thought I'd help people who'd orchestrated an elaborate plan to humiliate me. He said he didn't have a good answer. I told him I felt bad for him because he seemed like he'd been caught up in someone else's scheme, but I wasn't going to bail them out. I said my sister had made her choices and now she had to live with the consequences. He nodded slowly, said he understood, and thanked me for meeting with him anyway. As he stood up to leave, he mentioned that my sister had been talking about trying to sue me or the restaurant, claiming emotional distress or something. He said he'd told her it was a bad idea, that she had no case, but she was desperate. I told him to let her try. I had the audio recording, witness statements from the server and manager, and her own social media posts. Any lawyer would laugh her out of their office. Update 3. It's been 3 months now. The initial storm has settled into a kind of permanent freeze. Half the family has taken my sister's side, half has quietly distanced themselves from everyone involved, and a small handful has reached out to apologize. One of my cousins, someone who'd left the restaurant before the bill arrived, sent me a long message. She said she'd always felt uncomfortable with how the family treated me, but never spoke up because it was easier to go along. She apologized for being a coward and said watching everything unfold had made her realize she didn't want to be part of a family that operated that way. We've been talking regularly now, actually building a relationship for the first time. My parents sent a formal letter through actual mail. It was typed, not handwritten, which felt appropriately cold. They said they decided to respect my wishes for distance and wouldn't contact me anymore. They hoped I'd eventually understand that family was complicated and forgiveness was important, but they accepted my decision. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their role in what happened. Just a clinical goodbye wrapped in passive-aggressive hope that I'd someday see things their way. I heard through mutual connections that my sister and her husband did end up losing their house deposit. They're still renting, still fighting about money. She apparently tells anyone who'll listen that I ruined her life over one joke, that I'm vindictive and cruel. I don't bother correcting the narrative anymore. The people who matter know the truth. I've started therapy to process the adoption trauma and family dynamics I'd buried for years. My therapist asked if I regretted how I handled the restaurant situation. I thought about it carefully. I said no. For the first time in my life, I'd set a boundary and enforced it. I hadn't yelled, hadn't caused a scene, hadn't been cruel. I'd simply refused to be victimized and let the consequences play out naturally. Some people think I should have been the bigger person, should have paid the bill to avoid drama. But being the bigger person for 32 years is what allowed them to treat me that way in the first place. At some point, you have to stop absorbing other people's cruelty and let them face reality. I don't miss them. I thought I would. Thought there'd be some void where family should be. Instead, I feel free. I've built chosen family with friends who actually value me. I've stopped waiting for approval from people who were never going to give it. I've let go of the fantasy that if I just tried hard enough, they'd love me the way I needed. That dinner was the ending I needed, even if it wasn't the ending I'd hoped for years ago. My sister handed me a gift that night, though she didn't mean to. She showed me exactly who they all were when they thought they had the upper hand. And I showed myself I was strong enough to walk away. The bill came to $2,980. My freedom turned out to be priceless. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe us for more such real-life-based stories. Thanks in advance.